I'm feeling a little bit lonely up here, and also maybe I haven't come equipped with quite enough jokes as well. Okay, so I'm going to focus on one element of the work that we do, and that's particularly around some of the work that we've been doing with the leopard population in South Africa. And in putting this talk together, I toyed probably for an inappropriately long period of time with what I was going to put as my cover image. And having gone through a series of leopard photos, what I actually selected was a photo of one of our Earthwatch groups pretending to be leopards at the top of Mount Lajuma. And the reason for that is that even though I'm going to spend a lot of the time talking about leopards, actually a lot of the issues and a lot of the solutions that we talk about are very much related to the human communities that form part of this story. And our Earthwatch volunteers are a very important community in that regard, and one that hopefully will allow us to work towards some sustainable solutions for human-wildlife coexistence. So the area that we work in is in the very northeast of South Africa within the Soutpansberg Mountains, and so I guess it's important to recognize in that regard that this isn't a traditional African savanna. What we're looking at here is an area that's characterized by a rugged topography with variable weather patterns that on the south of the range in particular, the mist belts lead to a wide variety of habitat types, a real mosaic of different habitat structures that themselves support a very high level of biodiversity with large numbers of endemic species. But as a biodiversity hotspot, it's very much dominated by a human landscape. So the area we work in falls within the Vembe Biosphere Reserve. That's actually a very large reserve that extends way off over here and up there. But we work in the western end of the Soutpansberg Mountains, and it's not a state-protected area. It's made up of a mosaic of different land use properties, including private nature reserves and ecotourism ventures, but also livestock farms, game farms, and also hunting concessions. But it's an area of largely natural vegetation that's surrounded by areas where you can see clear evidence of human activity, farming activity, a series of game farms on the north. So I'm going to tell you a lot about the work that we do here, but also in trying to get a sense of the broader leopard population dynamics in the region. I'll touch on some of the work that we've been doing as well within the Bloberg Nature Reserve, which, as you can see, despite actually being only 10 to 20 miles apart, is very much separated by a sea of human activity. So I want to take you back to when we first started working on the leopard population and to the work of one of my PhD students who I acquired from Dan some time ago, Julia Chase-Gray. And when we went to work within the Soutpansberg, what we were told was that this was a leopard hotspot. There was something very significant about the leopard population where we were working. So that was the question that we started out on. And the way that we approached that, as so many carnivore studies do, is through the use of automatic camera traps. Set up within the environment, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year in our case. And we set them up in pairs so that when carnivores walk by, or indeed any animal walks by, they trigger it, and we get photographs of both sides of the animals. Now, the fortunate thing about leopards is they come with whilst not quite the ready-made bar print of leopards, nevertheless fairly characteristic signature, and we can use these unique spot patterns and particularly areas of each individual leopard that we identify to track individuals through time. Using then statistical software that allows us to use the patterns of the frequency with which we recapture animals within the environment, we can use that to calculate the density of animals that we see within the Soutpansberg. And when we do that, the calculations back in 2008 told us that there were 10.72 precisely leopards per 100 kilometers squared. It's a very odd-looking leopard, that 0.72. Now, in isolation, that number means very little. But when we start to compare it against other African populations for which leopard densities have been published, you see that the Soutpansberg is very much at the upper end, really only the Kruger National Park and the prime leopard habitat within the Kruger National Park has a significantly greater leopard density. And when we start to compare it against other populations living outside of state-protected areas, or indeed other populations in mountainous environments, the Soutpansberg does seem to come out as standing at the head of that, having one of the highest leopard densities. Perhaps it is indeed a leopard hotspot. So back in 2008, what we really had was a picture of a very healthy leopard population, and one that we assumed was a source for many of those lower-lying areas, with animals migrating out of this mountainous region and supplying subpopulations in the areas around. So moving forward to 2010, up to that point, my research within South Africa had very much been a partnership between my own university, Durham University in the UK, and the Lajuma Research Centre, where we're based in South Africa. But it's at that point that we became involved with Earthwatch and also sort of formalised the work that we do within South Africa as the Primate and Predator Project. Now, I'm really only going to focus on talking about the predator component of that today, but many of the issues, and particularly many of the conclusions that I'll come to at the end, are equally relevant for a lot of the stuff that we do in relation to the primate community. So one of the things that emerged, or one of the things that we were able to build on as a result of our association with Earthwatch, was significantly expanding the camera grid that we were working on. So in conjunction with our volunteers, we expanded it to 24 paired camera stations, 48 cameras set out within the mountains. This generates an enormous number of photographs, which thankfully you help us to process. The record to date, I think, is held in 2012, where Earthwatch volunteers processed some 165,000 camera images for us. An enormous effort that makes a massive contribution to our work, but also helps to identify new leopards on our Earthwatch teams. So here's two leopards that have been identified. Bexy, a combination of Becky and Lexi that discovered it. And Evelyn, named after, I believe, one of our volunteers' grandmothers. So contributing to our understanding, I'm not sure whether that's a good or a bad thing, actually. But really contributing to our understanding of the dynamics of the leopard population. But one of the other things that we really wanted to understand is, if we do have a leopard hotspot with a very high leopard density, what is it that is helping this environment to support these animals? And understanding how the animals move about within the environment is critically important. So working with local vets, we wanted to establish a program of collaring to understand the movements of the leopards within the mountains. And again, the relationship with Earthwatch has been instrumental in this, both in establishing the sorts of bomas that we use in order to capture the animals, carting around the recovery crates, but also, more importantly now, helping us to download the information from the collars themselves. And this is really enlightening, what comes back from these collars. So in 2012, we collared the first 3 leopards within the population, a female CC and 2 territorial males, or at least that's what we assumed on the basis of the camera images that we got. And you can see, perhaps as we expected, the female had a much smaller range, localized within the mountains, and whilst one of the territorial males also had a range very much localized within the mountain, the other had a range that extended considerably out into a number of the farming areas. And I want to give you the story of each of these individual animals and what we've learned. Starting with those 2 males. Drogo here was actually one of the largest males that we'd picked up on the camera, but since they were both resident and we thought they were both territorial males within the region, we wanted to collar them. And when we did that, as I've already shown you from Drogo here, we started to pick up this ranging pattern. The mountains here are really this sort of block here of properties. So a range that extended into the mountains, but also significantly down into the lower lying and farming areas. And what we started to observe was, here now, Michel coming in after we've collared him, actually starting to force Drogo off the mountain, his range becoming consolidated down in the farming areas. We were learning something of the dynamics of how the males operate within this mountainous system. What was disturbing was the day that we picked up these fixes. If I tell you that the scale here is just 30 meters, Drogo had stopped moving. Now, the collars themselves also contain a SIM card. We pick up the data from the mobile phone network. And in locating where these fixes were, they turned out to be in the barn of one of the local farmers. He was quite aggressive to us, wanted us to pay him for the cattle he said that the leopard had killed, and in return for that, he would give us the collar back. Now, fortunately, at the time, we were working with a camera crew, a film crew, and actually in giving him the opportunity to talk and explain his story to the film crew, actually placated him a great deal. He actually gave us our collar back so that we could download the remainder of the data. But it was the first indication that perhaps things weren't quite as rosy as we'd been assuming. So we continued to follow Michel, and he actually started to expand into Drogo's range. And about a month later, the fixes also disappeared from his collar. Now, we were quite pleased when a couple of weeks after that, on doing a camera run, we actually picked him up on the cameras. It looked like he was still wearing the collar. The collar had likely malfunctioned. Unfortunately, a few weeks after that, we picked him up again, still wearing the collar, but with a significant lesion here on his side and a snare caught around his waist. We were due to start trapping a couple of weeks after that to apply new collars to other leopards within the community. We brought that forward. Here's one of our bomas again. The day before the vets arrive, here he is seeking out actually the baits that we've already started pre-baiting the traps with. Unfortunately, this is the second to last time that we saw him. We picked him up a couple of weeks later. The collar had dropped off as it was designed to do automatically, but we never picked him up again, almost certainly succumbing to the injuries from that snare. You all still okay? CC. Okay, this is the female within the population, and we'd known her since 2006 from some of the very preliminary camera trap work that we've been involved in. We watched her grow up to a fabulous adult animal, and because she was resident in the area, again, we wanted to collar her to understand how she was using the mountainous region. Her collar only operated for 3 months, and she also disappeared off the cameras at that time. In seeking and going back to the last known fix that we received, some months later, after an enormous amount of effort, unfortunately we encountered this. She basically retired to a cave, obviously, but in actually looking closely at the skeleton, again, evidence of a snare that was caught around one of her wrists. And unfortunately, this is a pattern that's repeated itself. So the initial 3 individuals all died before the collar made it through the first year of life. And actually 2 of the other animals, 2 of the males that we've subsequently collared, are almost certainly as well died within the population. Suspected dead because they disappear off our cameras at the same time that we cease to get any data back from their collars. But I want to tell you about the one collar that we now have retrieved after a full, well, not quite a full year of life. It did malfunction towards the end, but we were able to recover it. And that's to give you a sense of BB's story. Now, you've already met BB's mother. Oh. I've taken her image out, maybe. Okay, well, BB's been in our population for a long time. Cece's his mother. And we'd followed him since a young cub, and pretty much whenever anything happened within our population or within our cameras, this was the leopard to blame. So when we found a bushbuck carcass some 10 meters from our accommodation, who came back that night to collect it? It was BB. Who was it foolish enough to hunt porcupine on our cameras? Who's the vandal? But because he'd remained largely actually in a ranging area where his mother had grown up and where therefore he'd grown up, oh, they're out of order. There he is with his mother. Because he had grown up in an area and was localized to the mountain, again, it was... We've got a number of slides out of order here, so this could be interesting. Okay. Okay, well, at some point you may see his ranging patterns. One of the things that, and this is a joke I'm stealing from Nigel Winsor now, one of the great roles that our Earthwatch volunteers play is to go through the motions. We pick up an awful lot of leopard scat that requires washing, poo masks on here, and processing. Because, as you've seen, our leopards move out into the farming landscapes, and in doing so, a lot of the landowners are reporting that they're taking livestock. But in monitoring the leopard diets, one thing that we'd never really picked up any evidence of is domestic stock appearing in the diet of the leopards. So over 30% focus on these guys: bushbunk, natural prey within the region, but bush pig, hyrax, primates, other small antelope, forming the vast majority of the diet of these carnivores within this mountain landscape. So how is it that we get these perceptions from the landowners telling us that they're very serious stock killers? Because we'd never picked up any evidence of that. And this really replicates similar information that we collected back in 2008. This is just from this year. So one of the things, though, that we did know about BB was that whilst his range was largely focused here up in the mountains, we do have these forays out into novel areas, only visiting from time to time. So heavily focused up in the mountain, but these forays out into the farming areas where we suspect things could be, or where potentially there's this potential for conflict. So it was, I guess, slightly shocking, but perhaps not surprising, to be called down to one of the local communities who were reporting problems with a calf that had been dragged out of a boma. Again, they wanted us to pay for it because we were the leopard people in the mountain, and therefore it was clearly one of our leopards that was responsible. They were also going to poison the carcass that night in order to get the animal that had taken it when we returned. This is giving it away now, because these are all back to front. I'm not sure quite what's happened here. Well, to cut a long story short, you should probably have guessed. It was BB that turned up that night, I suspect. So this is the site that greeted us when we got down here. The calf had been dragged out of this rather inappropriately constructed boma, and they allowed us to set up a camera trap on it to not poison the carcass that night, to see what it was that was coming back. So as you've seen, it was actually BB, and you can see the collar that was present. Now, at that point, we didn't know really what we had the capacity to do, and actually I contacted Earthwatch, who were absolutely fantastic and provided us with foundation funding to immediately go down and work within the community to help actually work with them to improve their livestock husbandry and to significantly improve the, and as you can see, the carcasses here is still on the ground. We were there within days, able to reconstruct this with Earthwatch support, and actually to improve the husbandry techniques and set up a dialogue with this community that actually has seen them move a lot of the cattle much further away from the mountain and not actually in the sorts of areas that we were working on in that particular day. So where we've arrived now is a situation where we thought we had this population source some 4 or 5 years ago, but actually what we're finding is that the sources of potential mortality within the population, both legal and illegal hunting, the snaring that we've been picking up, traps that are used within a lot of the communal areas, but also the importance of leopard furs and animal parts in traditional medicine are all placing enormous pressure on this leopard population. And rather than it being a population source, effectively we've got an attractive sink, very perhaps, or it appears to a leopard, a very profitable, a very good area to live in, but they're moving into the area without realizing that the risks that are inherent within the system. Animals are constantly moving in and suffering a variety of causes of mortality that's bringing more animals into that population. So the picture that we have here actually in 2014 is one that's far from healthy. And what I've picked here is an image of a leopard from the nearby Blowberg population. And what I hope you can see is that this leopard's obese. That doesn't happen naturally. This is an animal that's almost certainly being baited by one of the landowners to return night after night to the same location, so that when they get a hunting permit, they've got an enormous leopard turn up to satisfy a client paying a large amount of money. So how do we move forward from here? Well, the first important thing that we need to do is we need to feed this information that we're collecting back into policy. And in order to achieve that, we've sort of joined our project together in collaboration with Panthera and the local Limpopo Nature Conservation to set up a 10-year monitoring program that moves not just within the mountains but extends out into some of the lower lying areas, where we'll be sampling the same areas for the next 10 years and feeding that directly back into the recommendations for hunting quotas to at least start to address that element of the risks and the mortality inherent within this population. But we've been able to utilize the camera images that we collect for a much broader pattern of community engagement. So here, with support from an Earthwatch Schulman Award and from some very generous shopping center owners who gave us one of the free lots within their shopping center, we were able to set up a camera exhibition, a photographic exhibition, using images that we've been getting off our camera traps. Hundreds of visitors. We've subsequently moved it also to a display within a coffee shop in a town at the other end of the mountain. And the feedback from this that you get really shows the level of misunderstanding about wildlife within the region and the need for this sort of community engagement. You know, people talking that they had no idea we had so many animals in South Africa, and I think we misunderstand what people know about their own ecology and environment from watching wildlife programs on the TV. Very often the people are not aware of the animals on their doorstep. But they also recognized how important it is to make people aware of the wildlife that surrounds them. So this helps us to engage with one element of the community, and we've already had a number of farmers that have phoned us as a result of this exhibition asking for advice on how to deal with the leopards on their land so that they don't have to take the lethal control methods that they've been using in the past. But we've been also taking the message out into the local communities. So here our field team leader, Katie Williams, who's herself doing a PhD on the brown hyena, but we've been running display boards in some of the local communities, providing information about the animals that are using their lands. We've also been fortunate enough as part of our Earthwatch teams to bring the children from these schools up to Laduma to engage in our activities, which is part of our much broader engagement with the Eco Schools program, which is actually run and coordinated in the region by Judy van Schalkwijk, who's actually based at Laduma as well. And this is a very important component of how we take things forward. And we were actually fortunate last month to bring a series of the Eco School teachers up to be part of one of our teams. It showed that, again, many of the misunderstandings about wildlife were embedded within actually those that are communicating knowledge about science to the school children. So by being able to work with them, we can hope to change some of those misconceptions about the wildlife and how dangerous wildlife is within their environment. Now, a lot of what I've just talked about is often framed as human-wildlife conflict. And as a final message, human-wildlife conflict is often defined when the ecological needs of animals and humans collide. And yes, that's true, and it's certainly true that whether we're talking about the predators or whether we're talking about the primate communities that we work with, they do cause genuine economic loss to the landowners. But actually, where a lot of the conflict comes from is different human stakeholders disagreeing about how we deal with this problem, how we move forward from this point. From a sort of a protectionist, conservationist perspective, to the landowners utilizing these lethal control methods because they perceive a real and consistent and persistent problem. So actually, a lot of what we're dealing with is human-human conflict. So while we need to understand the ecological dimensions of wildlife in this environment, actually, I think to move forward, a lot of our effort really has to focus on these human dimensions of wildlife, because ultimately, that's both where the problems and the solutions will hopefully lie. And that's part of the story that I hope more of you can be part of.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. So we are on time. One quick question, if anyone has the end, go for it. Right there, she is the young lady.
How is cheetahs different from leopards?
Oh, good question.
Well, the easiest way to tell them apart, and maybe that's the answer that I'll give you. The first thing is that cheetahs are largely diurnal. They're active during the day. Leopards are actively active throughout the day and the night. They're more often nocturnal, particularly in areas with humans. But if you're looking at the faces and you want to tell them apart, then a leopard has a face looking like this, and if you look at a cheetah, it will have these big tear marks running down its face, and that's the easiest way for you to tell them apart.
Fantastic. Thank you. And more questions can be asked at the end. We are so appreciative. Thank you, Russell. Woo.